I enjoyed the job of careers master immensely, and it opened up meaningful opportunities. The ministry was very keen to create new counselling materials, so it offered field trips and workshops that I was able to participate in. I went with a group of Form 4s to Gaborone to tour the famed President's Hotel. Fans of Alexander McCall Smith will remember that, where a dozen different skills were introduced to kids who had only ever lived in mud huts. The luxury initially overwhelmed them, but then they discovered the kitchens, housekeeping services, administrative areas of the hotel, and were given to understand that the more educated and skilled they became, the higher the pay scale opportunities. We then visited engineering offices and got to see computers developing blueprints for bridges and buildings, and met a sayer who talked about his job of figuring out how many bricks, nails, window frames he needed to source and to bid on for whichever construction site he was working on. Finally, we met with the first ever first female commercial pilot to complete her training in Botswana. The subsequent trip had us going to the Orapa diamond mine. It was heady and inspiring, and I managed to produce worksheets which I tested out on the Moeng students and then shipped to Gaborone, where they received a favourable welcome. Concurrently, great changes were taking place in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was released from prison. A referendum was about to take place, and apartheid would soon be on its last legs. Perhaps relations between the students in my charge and their peers in South Africa would become somewhat different in the future. It was only 54 kilometers to the border crossing at Grobelersbrug, and Petersburg was around 200 kilometers beyond that. It was a manageable day outing, and as the self-promoted careers master, I could justify a day out from school as a professional development day. After this point, I had only read about apartheid. Now I had an opportunity to experience it for myself. On the appointed day, as the sky lightened, I opened the rusting gate that kept the school cattle from wandering and headed over the bridge to Rotolo village, which was nestled on the other side of the Swapong Hills. My little red Suzuki, with its lawnmower-sized engine and four-wheel drive, purred happily as it escaped the clutches of the school cradled in its hidden valley. The nearby village was just coming to life, and for a change, I passed through it without anyone waving me down wanting a ride. My trip to the Sherwood Park border crossing was uneventful, so I arrived early and had to wait for the border to open. The mighty grey-green Limpopo was not flowing. I could easily imagine one of Kipling's crocodiles lurking in the murky pools that lingered below the bridge. "Where are you going?" Was a question I reasonably anticipated as I entered the South African border post. "You're not smuggling any weapons for the ANC by any chance?" Caught me slightly off guard. The two large farm boys in their blue-grey uniforms seemed to be only half joking. I'm a teacher from Moeng College and I'm going to Capricorn Secondary School in Petersburg." The answer seemed plausible, but it did not deter them from turning, prodding and tapping every possible joint and seal in the vehicle to see if there was a hidden AK-47 somewhere. Once I was safely out of the sight of the border post, I took the time to take in the surroundings. Immediately, there was a long chain-link fence everywhere, with razor wire atop them and solid gatehouses at farm entrances. I could hear dogs barking as my little vehicle slid past the lush fields and pastures. The farms were expertly crafted out of the rich red soil of the veldt, and every possible mechanical tool was purring away in the fields. It looked as though there was a conscious attempt to cut down on the number of workers hired to run them, in stark contrast to the Zimbabwean farms that relied heavily on manual workers, with their clusters of huts and often small accompanying village schools. At the first junction, there was a sea of waving arms of people hoping for a ride. I drove past them all until I spotted an elderly lady and pulled up in front of her. The little jeep was immediately surrounded by a crush of shouting, shoveling, pleading bodies, but I picked the old lady, a somewhat younger woman, and two teenage boys. Everyone else looked affronted, as if I should have managed to fit several more passengers inside my small vehicle. But we are enough, as the locals would say. The boys sat on top of each other in the front seat and immediately engaged me in conversation. I learned about the Kaiser Chiefs and how they were the Liverpool of South Africa. Of course, one day these two would be playing for Liverpool, but they had just completed their junior matriculation exams and would be waiting for us at home. It would be some time before they would be making the great trip to the Kop, home of the famed Red Devils. They had such fine dreams of what they would become as they spoke to me in their halting English. They told me how they were only 65 students in their class who had written their exams, the other 70 having stayed away, so they felt they would have a good chance of continuing with their education. 40 minutes later, when we came to the junction where I was turning, they jumped out, still laughing and chattering away, and I couldn't help but feel hopeful for them. A further 20 kilometers along the road, the old lady indicated she wanted to get out too. I could see a cluster of huts a short distance along the dusty road as I pulled over. When she got out from the vehicle, I saw tears in her eyes. I spun around and asked the other woman what had happened. Had I offended her in some way? Oh, she is happy, Ra. She is an old lady, and she will tell such a story tonight to the family. She says she has never before had a ride in a vehicle driven by a white man. You have made her very happy, and she thanks you. I felt the air suck out of my lungs and a lump catch in my throat. How was such a thing possible? I felt ashamed, and it took me a moment to collect myself. In the course of our conversation, I discovered that this remaining passenger was also an English teacher. I asked her what the boys had said, thinking that 135 students they referred to were all in Form 2, but probably in 3 classes. In Botswana, I was used to teaching classes of between 28 and 35 students. Nora, I myself have a class of 156 students. Then how many classes do you teach? I had complained about having 47 students at Matumba and had struggled with the marking. I have 4 classes. That is over 540 students in total. When it comes to the exams, those who have a hope of passing come to school and the rest stay away. In that way, I only have about 240 exams to mark. She went on to relate stories about how the students at her school had once burnt down a teacher's house because they did not like the way he had marked their work. I dropped this last passenger before we reached the city. Make sure you turn left when you get to the junction, otherwise you will be in the shanty town, and it is unsafe for white people to be there, were her parting words. I wasn't sure which junction she meant, and sure enough, I did find the shanty town. It was a bit unnerving thinking that I might actually be in danger simply by being a white person surrounded by black people. However, I managed to get directions to the city without any trouble and eventually arrived in Petersburg. It was a medium-sized modern agricultural center with box stores and farm equipment malls to rival car malls of the average North American town. It was impressive, and I made a mental note that many of my students had never really seen a modern town before and had to schedule some time to explore the city. Might be a bonus. I made my way to a bank wishing to acquire some rand and a chance for a snack and a cup of tea. I went inside and asked the security guard where I could get some money with my Visa card. I was directed to a booth, and a white man in his early 30s asked me to take a seat. There was a solicitous manner about the young man that made me feel ill at ease. He took my card and after a few minutes returned with the appropriate paperwork and the card. "There you are, sir. But I am afraid you will need to join the queue. In the old days," he left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was obvious. As a white man, I would automatically have gone to the front of the line. I was used to standing in lines uh, at banks with Africans, as that had been the norm for me for the past 5 years. What I was not used to was watching the tellers interrogate and humiliate the customers they were serving. "Is that you? It doesn't look like you." An old man had given a tattered passbook to the young white teller, who was barely old enough to start shaving. I noticed that there were no female tellers in the bank, probably because their women were at home raising the kids. Certainly these customer service skills would have been more appropriate in a rugby clubhouse bar. How wrong is this? I mused. In African culture, young men would clap their hands together to show respect for an elder and then wait to be addressed. The elder's passbook was taken inside an office and a pretense of a phone call was made. Several minutes later, the young man returned and shouted at the old man about getting a better picture taken. This scenario was played out numerous times, and each time I witnessed, I felt the anger grow within me. My turn came. "Can I help you, sir?" The solicitousness was back. The teller looked at my passport. There was no shouting, no turning away. "Oh, from Canada, eh? I have relatives in Canada." I was at no mind to engage in social niceties with this particular individual. "I have to get back to the border before it closes, and I have business to do here. Could you please get me my money?" I stared down the startled expression that appeared on the face of the teller. "Oh, certainly, sir." He reached into his cash drawer and instantly pulled out the money, which he counted out and handed to me. "Have a good day, sir." The transaction had taken a single solitary minute. There was nothing spoken, but the angry frown on my face held the young man for a few brief seconds. The people in the line noticed it too. I turned, looked at the line of African faces, and shrugged my shoulders. Several smiles shone briefly, and then, just as quickly, were suppressed as they waited for their little personal ritual to be acted out. At the nearby cafeteria, I was unable to figure out on what felt so different. I ordered some food and sat looking through the windows at the comings and goings in the mall. I had not expected to see many Africans in the mall, as it was upscale, and I knew that they would have more sense than to waste their money in the overpriced white balls. Somewhere in the city, there would be markets where the prices better suited the poor wages that most of them received. The server was a chunky young man of about 20 years. He looked awkward as he steered his way through the tables with a coffee pot in his hands, and he overfilled my cup. He apologized and then went back to give the order for the sandwich that I had chosen. What was so unfamiliar and uncomfortable about this scene was that for years I was used to service being provided by people of all shapes, colors, and experience. They were, for the most part, good at their job and made an effort to make the customer feel at ease and happy. This young man was ill-suited for his position, but as I looked around, I saw no colored workers. He was working there simply because of the color of his skin. There was no African workers visible in any of the shops that I could see through the plate glass windows of the cafe. I shuddered involuntarily and with the realization this was apartheid. "Good morning," I said in greeting to the secretary, a smartly dressed woman in her late 30s who was busy typing in the office at Capricorn School. "Is there any chance I could talk to the headmaster?" "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No, I've just driven across the border from Botswana and wondered if I could talk to him. The phones in our area do not work very well, so I thought I would chance dropping in." "Oh, he's out on the rugby pitches. There are matches this weekend." "Oh, wonderful. I'd love to watch a bit of rugby," I enthused. "Could you tell me what he might be wearing and what to call him?" I asked innocently, thinking that I could seek him out on the pitch. We have 17 acres of rugby pitches. You wouldn't be able to find him. May I ask what you wish to see him about? I explained my idea of having an exchange between the two schools, but I was reluctant to leave without having had the chance to talk to anyone other than the school secretary. Perhaps the deputy would be available. Ah, the careers master's in. Hold on, I'll ask him. She dialed his number, and seconds later a door opened down the hallway. Pete Stein, he said, introducing himself. His paw enveloped mine, and I had visions of this man having played second row for one of the state rugby sides in his youthful days. He welcomed me and brought me into the office. What can I do for you, Mr. Gofford? Perhaps he thought I was planning to enroll my little rugby-playing son in the near future, judging from the trophies I could see in the case beside his door. He listened carefully as I explained my ideas on an exchange between the schools. I came here as I heard that this was the first mixed-race school in northern Transvaal. I thought that things might be changing soon, and as an exchange between our two schools, it might be an interesting experience for our students. Oh, yes, we have 7 Indian students in our school. They're doing very well. And the first obstacle was that Moying students did not play rugby and Capricorn students didn't play football. Undeterred, I explained that Moying students often took their chess and debating teams along with their sports teams, and surely something could be worked out. It was a friendly conversation, and by the end there was an exchange of phone numbers, contact names, and a brief description of the route for the return visit by their students to Moying. I left with the impression that it was a hopeful possibility and a promise that we would receive a phone call soon. I spent a couple of hours exploring the city and established a number of points of interest for the Moying students to visit in the future. Petersburg was a hub of the Northern Transvaal agricultural community, so it had much to offer. In the middle of the afternoon, I headed back to the border, feeling very positive about my day in South Africa. I picked up 2 young men and a woman and drove towards the border. There was plenty of time. There wasn't much conversation, which disappointed me. The men were muscular and silent and sat behind me, and I felt slightly uncomfortable. Finally, just before the turnoff, they asked to be let out. The woman had to get out as well in order to let them out. She stood there looking uncomfortable, standing on the side of the road as if she were troubled. I thought she might be worried about being alone in a vehicle with a white man. I asked her how far she was going. I should have got out some time back. Those 2 men were very bad men. They might have killed you and stolen your car. That is why I stayed with you. I was stunned. How easily I had let down my guard and assumed that because I was a Canadian, that I was a good eye. I was helping the cause, so nothing would happen to me. What a lucky fool I am, I said aloud, and turned around, even though time was pressing, and insisted that I drive my protector back to where she needed to be. The additional 40 kilometers meant that I had to race to the border before it closed for the night. Fortunately, I made it, but with only a few minutes to spare. The return to Botswana was uneventful as the big farm boys waved me through and invited me to come back again soon. At this point, I thought it possible with a busload of Bantu students under my charge. I speculated about my reception at that eventuality.